Good morning, everybody. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 11, roughly page 326 in the scriptures. If you have not been following along in your own word, I would strongly suggest you do that. Do so. The best word's tremendous. And we have playlists here, Old Testament and New Testament, and so I would recommend that you check them out because context matters a lot. And so my preferred method for you to have context is to read this word with your own eyeballs. Read your own Bible, follow along, or don't follow along. Just read your word. I don't care. But we also have playlists here that you can check out. Old Testament, New Testament. So we're in the story of David, and we're talking about David and Bathsheba in this particular portion, 11 and 12. There's a lot of good stuff in here. I'm going to try and be concise, but there's going to be some jumping around, so please bear with me. Father Yah, give me your words. And it came to be at the turn of the year, at the time that kings, sovereigns go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him, Joab being David's chief general, and his servants was with him and all Israel. And they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. And it came to be at evening time that David rose up from his bed and walked about on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very good to look at. And David sent and asked about the woman. And one said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" And so the Hittites were some of the peoples that Joshua and Israel were commanded to destroy. The Hittites and the Hivites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Jebusites, when they went into the land that was sworn to their fathers to possess, that they were supposed to go in there and slit throats, bro. Get it done. Operation Get It Done. And after 5 years of war, the land rested, and there were still Hittites and Hivites and Perizzites and Jebusites and yada, yada, yada amongst. So we can see even here that, and we'll see, Uriah was a good dude. Uriah was a good dude. In fact, he was one of David's mighty men, David's special forces, which is a different conversation for a different time, but worth a bit of research on your behalf. David had special forces, his mighty men. He had some very strong leaders and accomplished soldiers within his army, and Uriah being one of them, in service to David, who's in service to Yah. And so this is righteousness, right? He's in service to Yah. He's walking in a manner according to the laws, commandments, and right rulings. Uriah is a good dude. And he's a good dude that's a Hittite, that is part of the glory of Israel. Imagine that. So it's not just a New Testament construct that Israel is to be an esteemed to the nations. You see this throughout the word. And it came to be at evening time, David saw Bathsheba. And David sent messengers to fetch her. And she came to him, and he lay with her. For she was cleansing herself from her uncleanness, and she returned to her house. She was having her monthlies, and after the end of her monthlies, this is essentially, she was, taking a shower to clean up, right? And so David saw her. He's like, man, that's a hot lady down there. Hey, bring me that hot lady. And David sent messengers to fetch her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, for she was cleansing herself from her uncleanness. And she returned to her house. And the woman conceived and sent and informed David and said, I am pregnant. And David sent to Joab, his general, who's destroying the children of Ammon at Rabbah, and said, send Uriah the Hittite to me. It's like, bro, I need Uriah. And Uriah came to him, and David asked how Joab was doing, and how the people were doing, and how the fighting was going, as if, hey, I trust Uriah, send him to me, I want a report from the field. And so here comes Uriah. He said, how are things going, Uriah? Oh, David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went out from the king's house and a gift of the king followed him. But Uriah lay down at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his master, and did not go down to his house. And they informed David, saying, Uriah didn't go down to his house. David's like, son of a, why won't he just go to his house? So David said to Uriah, did you not come from a journey? Why do you not go down to your house? And Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are dwelling in booths, tents, and my master Joab and the servants of my master are encamped in open fields. And I should go to my house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As you live, and as your soul lives, let me not do this. He's like, bro, it's not ready. He's like, the Ark of the Covenant is in a tent, and you want me to go to a house? My general's out there sleeping in a field. And you want me to go lay down with my wife? He's like, no, sir, won't do it. Uriah was a good dude. And David said to Uriah, remain here today also, and tomorrow I let you go. And so Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. And David called to him, and he ate and drank before him, and he made him drunk. Drinking is not a sin. Drunkenness is. So David gets Uriah drunk. And at evening he went to lie on his bed with his servants of his master, but he did not go down to his house. And it came to be in the morning that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he's like, okay, well, this isn't going to work. So David writes a letter to Joab, puts it in the hand of Uriah, and he wrote in the letter saying, set Uriah in front of the toughest battle or strongest battle, and you shall turn away from him, and he shall be stricken and die. Now, what's interesting here is at this time, I saw a historian give a little spiel on this one time. There were like 8 great nations in the area of the time of, from like Joshua to David, the Hittites being one of them, and the the Egyptians, and anyway. And so, generally speaking, less than 1% of the population could read and write. They were literally. And so clearly, David, he's king, he can read and write, that's cool. Or he might have had a scribe and said, yo, write this down, although very likely it was by his own hand. Because David spent time in the courts under Shaul, and he was well learned, but I digress. So that, like, everybody had their own language, but also Akkadian. Akkadian was the Franqua lingua. Like now, around the world, English is used for business. Akkadian is what was used for business back in the day. And so, regardless of what language this was written in, it's likely, very likely, that Uriah couldn't read it. And so he's carrying around his own death sentence in his hand from his king to his general. And even if he could read it, it was also very likely sealed up. They were sealed orders. So it's kind of messed up. It's not kind of messed up. It's messed up. And he wrote in a letter saying, set Uriah in front of the toughest battle, and you shall turn away from him, and he shall be stricken and die. And it came to be, as Joab watched the city, he appointed Uriah to the place where he knew there were brave men of the opposite faction. And the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the people of the servants of David fell. And Uriah the Hittite also died. And Joab sent and reported to David all the events of the battle, and commanded the messenger, saying, when you have finished reporting all the events of the battle to the king, then it shall be, if the king's wrath rises, and he says to you, why did you go so near to the city when you fought? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who struck Abimelech the son of Jerubesheth? Was it not a woman who threw an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died at Thebets? Why did you go near the wall? So if King David gets pissed when he hears what happened, then you shall say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead. And it'll make sense to David. And the messenger went and came and reported to David all which Joab had sent him. And the messenger said to David, the men have been mighty against us, and came out to us in the field, and we drove them back as far as the entrance of the gate. And the archers shot from the wall at your servants, and some of the sovereign servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead. And David said to the messenger, say to Joab, do not let this matter be evil in your eyes. for the sword devours one as well as another. That phrase will come back to David. Strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it, and strengthen him. See, it's interesting too. David knows he's doing evil here, and he knows the effect it's having on his general, and so he says to the messenger, to strengthen Joab. He's like, hey, Joab just lost Uriah. Uriah was like one of the hardcores, dude. Like I said, he was like special forces, right? He was good dude. And now Uriah is dead because David was horny and whored after his wife. And Joab has probably been out of shape about this. Well, he knows enough about people and knows enough about his men to tell the messenger, go strengthen Joab. And the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, and she lamented for her husband. And when her mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But that deed that David had done was evil in the eyes of Yahweh. You think? Then Yahweh sent Nathan, the prophet Nathan, to David. And he came to him and said to him, there were 2 men in one city, one rich and the other poor. The rich one had flocks and herds, very many, but the poor one had only one little ewe lamb, which he had brought and kept alive. And it grew up with him and his children all together. It ate of his own food and drank from his own cup and lay in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. And a traveler came to the rich man, who refused to take from his own flock and from his own herd to prepare one for the wayfaring man who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. 2 guys. One guy's got massive flocks and herds, a rich man, yada, yada, yada. He's got all the, the nice Lambo and blah, blah, blah. He's massive flocks and herds. Another guy, poor man, doesn't have much, but he's got his family, and he's got his kids, and he's got this one little lamb. And it was actually commonplace at this age of Israel to keep a lamb as a pet, right? And so they have this lamb, and it's the only one they've got, but they love it and they take good care of it. And then this guy comes along and says, I have need of a lamb. And this traveler comes along, says, I have need of a lamb. And instead of taking from the rich man that had these massive flocks and herds, the lamb to meet the need was taken from the household that only had one lamb. That traveler, in my interpretation, that is the desire, the lust that David had. And we're going to see Nathan is rebuking David here in a moment. I'll just skip ahead a little bit. That's the desire, the lust that David had, because that's what it was, right? And Paul talks about sin first starts as an idea, and then that idea spirals into, you focus on it, and it spirals into action, and that action spirals into transgression, lawlessness, sin, right? Paraphrasing Paul. But David had multiple wives. He could have taken from any of his household, any of his lambs, to feed that traveler, and he didn't. He took from the one lamb that the poor man had. And the wrath of David burned greatly against the man, and he said to Nathan, as Yahweh lives, the man who has done this is a son of death. Also he has to repay 4-fold for the lamb, because he did this deed and because he had no compassion. So David's thinking that Nathan's bringing to him a story about a real guy with a real lamb. There was transgression, and he says, what are you going to do, king? And David says, this dude is a son of death. And also, not only that, he has to repay 4-fold for the lamb because he did this deed and because he had no compassion. Well, interestingly, just flip real quick to Exodus 22. Exodus 22, verse 1. When a man steals an ox or sheep and shall slaughter it or sell it, he repays 5 cattle for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. Torah. David knew the Torah. Interestingly, he knew it here in his brain. Not yours. He needs to not be chewing on that, please. Sorry, new puppy. He knew it in his brain. He didn't know it in his heart. David, for whatever reason, did not equate the stealing of Uriah's life, or wife rather, and then the stealing of his life, to the stealing of a sheep. See, this is, we talk all the time about, people like to say, well, the Torah is too hard, nobody can do it. And I'm like, you realize Messiah made it harder, right? Because the Torah is an external thing that says, don't kill your buddy and bang his wife. Yeshua says you shouldn't want to murder your buddy and you shouldn't look at his wife with lust in your eyes. Right? Yeah. So, also, he has to repay fourfold for the lamb because he did this deed and because he has no compassion. Then Nathan said to David, you are the man. You did this, he's saying. Thus said Yahweh Elohim of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Shaul, and I gave you your master's house, and your master's wives into your bosom, and gave you the house of Israel, and Judah. And if that were not enough, I would have also given you much more. You had all of this. You were the rich man with the flocks and the herds. You had all of this. And you couldn't be satisfied with it. And had you asked, I would have also given you much more. Why have you despised the word of Yahweh to do evil in his eyes? Despising the word of Yah is the equivalent of despising Yah himself. Disobedience to the word of Yah is the equivalent of disobedience to Yah himself. Why have you despised the word of Yahweh to do evil in his eyes? You have struck Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and his wife you took to be your wife, and you have killed him with the sword of the children of Ammon. 1 John 1 verse 6. 1 John 1 verse 6. If we say we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and are not doing the truth. Why have you despised the word of Yahweh? You lie, you are not doing the truth. You have struck Uriah the Hittite with the sword. You murdered, and his wife you took to be your wife. You adulterated, and you have killed him with the sword of the children of Ammon. And now the sword does not turn aside from your house. Both of these things are stealing, by the way. Thou shalt not steal. Think about that. He stole Uriah's life. Murder. He stole his wife. Adultery. You don't diminish your brother. He did. Severely. And now the sword does not turn aside from your house, because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus said Yahweh, see, I am raising up evil against you from your own house, and shall take your wives before your eyes, and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun, for you did it in secret, but I shall do this deed before all Israel, and before the sun. And we can see in 2 Samuel 16, which we will read in a few weeks rather, 21 and 22. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to look after the house, and all Israel shall hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you shall be strong. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the top of the house, and Absalom went into his father's concubines before the eyes of all Israel. Yeah, his own house is turning against him. And David said to Nathan, I have sinned against Yahweh. I have sinned against Yahweh. I didn't make a mistake. I didn't have an oopsie. I have sinned against Yahweh. The weight of that confession is what begins to turn this around for David. I have sinned against Yahweh. In the Hebrew, it's hata al Yahuwah. It's two words. Hata al Yahuwah. I have totally failed my Father. And it's that weight, that recognizing, confessing, that breaking of the dam that is the beginning of the turnaround here. And you see it next. And David said to Nathan, I have sinned against Yahweh. And Nathan said to David, also Yahweh has put away your sin. You shall not die. Now the penalty for murder is what? Death. The penalty for adultery is what? Death. You shall not die. Now, Yah forgives his sins instantly at the confession of, I have sinned against Yahweh. Hata al Yahuwah. It doesn't mean he doesn't pay a price. Death has been removed from David because of his transgression by the hand of Yahweh. You see, this gets back to the renewed covenant. Having the laws in your mind and written on your heart, and then he will be your Elohim, and you will be his people, and he will remember your sins and your lawlessness no more. David put those laws back in his mind and back on his heart. He confessed it meaningfully in the presence of Nathan to Nathan's face. And immediately, Yahweh remembers his sins and his lawlessness no more. Also, Yahweh has put away your sin. You shall not die. Psalms 51. I told you we were going to do a little jumping around today. Psalmus. Psalms 51. I have pages stuck together. By the hand of David, show me favor, O Elohim, according to your loving commitment, according to the greatness of your compassion. Blot out my transgressions, wash me completely from my guilt, and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions. Sin is transgression of the law. 1 John 3 verse 4, New Testament definition. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you alone I have sinned, and done evil in your eyes, that you might be proven right in your words. Be clear when you judge. See, I was brought forth in crookedness, and in my sin my mother conceived me. See, you have desired truth in the inward parts, and in the hidden part you make me know wisdom. Cleanse me with hyssop, and I am clean. Wash me, and I am whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins, and blot out all my crookedness. Create in me a clean heart, O Elohim, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your set-apart spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your deliverance, and uphold me, noble spirit. Let me teach transgressors your way, so that sinners turn back to you. There's another witness. Sin is transgression of the law. Let me teach transgressors your way, so that sinners turn back to you. Deliver me from blood guilt, O Elohim, Elohim of my deliverance. Let my tongue sing aloud of your righteousness. O Yahweh, open my lips, that my mouth declare your praise. For you do not desire slaughtering, or I would give it. You do not delight in ascending offerings. The slaughterings of Elohim are a broken spirit. A heart broken and crushed, O Elohim. These you do not despise. Do good in your good pleasure to Zion. Build the walls of Jerusalem. Then you would delight in slaughterings of righteousness, in ascending offerings, and complete ascending offering. Then young bulls would be offered on your slaughter place. These slaughterings that you would give are to be done when your spirit is unbroken. If the choice here is between a broken spirit that's offering slaughterings or a spirit that is made clean through Yahweh, the Father prefers that you come to him not with some bullcrap slaughtering as transgression for your sin, but that you confess your sin, and that he creates in you a clean heart and renew a steadfast spirit. For you do not desire slaughtering, or I would give it. You do not delight in a sinning offering. The slaughterings of Elohim are a broken spirit, a heart broken and crushed, O Elohim. These you do not despise. David's heart was broken by the weight of what he did, and he confessed it. And the Father removed the death penalty for his sin out fast. Now, it doesn't mean that transgression doesn't have consequences. Back to 2 Samuel 12, verse 14. However, because by this deed you have greatly scorned Yahweh, the child also who is born to you shall certainly die. And Nathan went to his house, and Yahweh smote the child that Uriah's wife had borne to David, and he was sick. So the child that come out of this adulterous relationship was murdered, killed by Yah. Not murdered, because murdered is unjust, and this killing was just. And Nathan went to his house, and Yahweh smote the child that Uriah's wife had borne to David, and he was sick. David was sick. And David sought Elohim for the child. The child was sick. The child got sick as well. So I got a lot of background stuff going on over here. And David sought Elohim for the child, and David fasted and went in and spent all night lying on the ground. So the elders of his house stood up over him to raise him up from the earth. But he would not, nor did he eat food for them. And on the 7th day it came to be that the child died. And the servants of David were afraid to inform him that the child was dead, for they said, Look, while the child was still alive, we spoke to him, and he would not listen to our voice. And how do we say to him that the child is dead? Then he shall do evil. It's like he wouldn't listen to us when the kid was alive, and now you want us to go tell him he's dead? And David saw that his servants were whispering. And David perceived that the child was dead. Then David said to his servants, Is the child dead? And they said, He is dead. David then rose up from the ground and washed and anointed himself and changed his garments. And he went into the house of Yahweh and bowed himself. Submission. He cleansed himself, went into the house of Yahweh and bowed himself. I bet you they had a long talk. Then he came to his own house and asked, and they set food before him, and so he ate. And his servants said to him, What is this that you have done? You fasted and wept because of the living child, but when the child died, you rose up and ate food. And he said, While the child was alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, Who knows whether Yahweh shows favor unto me, and the child shall live. But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Am I able to bring him back again? I am going to him, but he does not return to me. I am going to him, but he does not return to me. Meaning he is in the afterlife. He is with Yah. These bugs. The child has gone to Yah. He can't come back. But David will go to Yah at the end of his age, and they will be together again. And David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and went into her and lay with her. Now, this is the first time, other than the moment we meet her, that she's referred to Bathsheba, his wife. Prior to that, she was Uriah the Hittite's wife, as she's addressed thus far, and it just further illustrates the transgression of David. We don't get to hear her name again until after the child has died. David has confessed his sins, David has repented, and David has bowed himself in the house of Yahweh. There's some order now being returned to this relationship, and yet and still in the light of all this, David has done out of all the unrighteousness that came from this, David is now this woman's husband. And he hasn't put her away, which would be unrighteous. It's complicated. It's amazing how a little bit of sin can really, really complicate things. You know, we would love to say, well, what's the right thing? Look how complicated this Torah makes it to do the right thing here. No, doing the right thing is complicated. The right thing from jump would have been not to bang Bathsheba because that wasn't his wife. But because he did, now there's a whole downstream, the ramifications downstream are massive. You know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. A little bit of righteousness up front would have saved so much headache had he just remained the rich man with his flocks and his herds, with all his wives and his concubines, that if he had, that traveler, that need had come to him, he had many different ways to deal with that. But instead, he allowed lust to gain a foothold. And now Uriah's dead and the child's dead. And what can we do? Well, he took responsibility for that woman. Should have never been in that position in the first place, but we're here now. Got to do right by her. So, she is his wife. And David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and went into her and lay with her. So she bore a son, and he called his name Solomon, or Salomah. And Yahweh loved him, and sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet, and called his name Jedediah, because of Yahweh, which means loved of Yahweh. And Joab fought against Rabbah of the children of Ammon and captured the royal city. Now, all this, I mean, this is, Joab's been, what, gone a year at this point? Because David sees Bathsheba, bangs her, she gets pregnant, Uriah gets called home, he gets sent back to the battlefield, he gets killed, the child is born, the child dies, David goes back into her, and she conceives another child, and it's, I mean, we're well over a year here. You know, we're talking 2 years at this point. And then Solomon's born. And then Joab's still out there fighting against Rabbah of the children of Ammon and captured the royal city. And Joab sent messengers to David and said, I have fought against Rabbah and I have captured the city's water supply. Siege tactics, bro. Starve you out. Capture the city's water supply. That in of itself, Joab was a good general. Right? David was surrounded by good people. They knew what they were doing. And now, gather the rest of the people together and encamp against the city and capture it, lest I capture the city and it be called after my name. So Joab is goading David out of the palace at this point. Remember, David was a soldier, and a good one. It's like, bro, it's almost as if, my words, not the Bible's words, it's almost as if Joab is saying, Hey, you seem to be unable to keep from getting in trouble over there in the palace. Why don't you come out here and do what you do, bro? Or do I have to come take this city and we'll name it after me? And David gathered all the people and went to Rabbah and fought against it and captured it. And he took their king's crown from his head. And he took their king's crown from his head, as if it was king to king. And set them to the saw. And he took their king's crown from his head, and its weight was a talent of gold, 75.6 pounds of gold, with precious stones, and it was on David's head. And he brought out the spoil of the city, a very great amount. And he brought out the people who were in it, and set them to the saw, and to the sharp instruments of iron, and to axes of iron, and made them pass over to the brickworks. So he put the people who were in Rabbah to work, set them to work, indentured servitude. And so he did with all the cities of the children of Ammon. And David and all the people returned to Jerusalem. We're going to end there for today. But as you can see, you got to confess your sins. And the Father will remove that penalty of death from you and the confession of that sin. But that doesn't mean you don't pay a price for your transgression. And just because a situation started in righteousness doesn't mean that it should continue in unrighteousness. If you did the wrong thing and got yourself into a jam, doesn't mean you should continue to do the wrong thing. Do the right thing in the situation you find yourself in now, and bring order and discipline to the situation. Confess your sins. Humble yourself, submit yourself to the will of Yah. Lead your household in righteousness. Suffer the consequences of your actions so that you learn from them and you don't make those mistakes again. And praise Yah that He would continue to strive with us and show us grace and favor. Bless y'all. Shalom.